Oh my God, is it another live stream so soon? Yes, it is. Holy shit, my hair's bad. What the hell? The thing was sticking out like a damn tumor. Still is. Oh, God. All right. Okay. I think I look at least a little bit presentable now. All right. Let's make sure I got my chat settings set up here, just in case anybody joins in. I don't know if anybody's going to join in on this one or not, because I remember Ethan Van Sciver said he was not going to have a trash cast today because of Mr. Medicare having a show. And I did confirm that Mr. Medicare is doing something. I never followed Mr. Medicare. I heard about him through Gonzalo Lira, and I think that was probably through Gonzalo Lira that I also heard about Mr. Medicare's cancer or something like that. He's got a terminal illness. So the fact that he's still alive and still on, well, that's pretty amazing. But I had never followed the guy. So, and I don't think I'm going to pull that many followers away from him who are interested in, between the two of us, I'm sure y'all are going to be watching him. In any case, I want to address a few items that came up during this week, and I wanted to get to them last live stream, but just doing 3 topics there was enough to fill up all of the time. So the first thing I wanted to cover really is the Rippaverse like losing steam already? And the reason I asked this is because Eric July, he posted a video in which he's asking fans pretty vaguely. I think this was clipped from his For Canon's Sake video. He had a video in which he asked fans, what genres do you want to see the Rippaverse cover? And when I saw that, a chill ran down my spine. I was like, what? Why are you asking fans for genres now? Because when you look at the Rippaverse as it is already, and you look at the number of characters that they've got so far, you've got Isom, who's got like the urban drama stuff. You've got Alphacore, which is the straight up superhero stuff. You've got Yaira, who, she may be an alien, she may be like Thor, she may be something like that. So you've got that maybe mythological or science fiction aspect. So you've got that. Then you've got Bloodruth for your fantasy stuff. Then you've got Norfolka for horror. And then you've got Gooding, who's, you can take into the technology and cyber realm. And I'm like, what genre are you not already covering? Why is it that you're out there asking fans what else they want to see? Are you serious? I mean, do you not already have enough stuff lined up? Because remember, he's got all 6 of those characters, all of whom are going to have their own number 1 issues at least, probably extending beyond that. And then he's got an event book coming up by Chuck Dixon, so that's a 7th book there. But I'm just thinking to myself, it's like this company is just getting off the ground, and one of his goals, I know, in the future is to have a book coming out every month, which I think is probably doable for him at this point. I mean, he's already coming out with 6 different properties. Now, some of that is going to have to be written by, a lot of that is going to have to be written by people other than him, which means he's going to have to be recruiting more talent and whatnot. But I'm looking at this and saying, you've got 6 properties, and they're all from different genres, and you're asking for different genres? You've already got enough properties where you could come out with a book every 2 months. And you want to know what fans have to say about what they're interested in now? And something about this is just not computing to me. Something about this makes me nervous. Because when I saw that, I thought to myself, you can't be serious. I mean, you have all of these titles and characters, even Larry Shungite, for God's sakes. I mean, he could have his own title just from all the crap that's going around there. He could be like the freaking weirdo Deadpool type of the Rippaverse. You've got all these characters who are all in these different domains. why is it that you're not confident enough in what you've got that you're asking for more? I mean, I just feel like there's something about getting the cart before the horse here. Because first, I would like to see 6 Rippaverse titles start up each, so that we've got a bi-monthly schedule. If you could get a Rippaverse title out every 2 months, Isom followed by Alphacore, followed by Yaira, followed by Gooding, followed by Norfolka, followed by Bloodruth, followed by whoever the hell I missed. If you can get all of those going on a regular cycle so that each of those are coming out year by year, you've got a self-sustaining company already. Where is this call for more genre stuff coming out? And I was thinking, I was really getting worried for a second, and then I thought of 2 things where maybe it's not necessarily cause for concern, but or at least not cause for concern in the idea in the fact that maybe the Rippaverse is just running out of ideas. But I'm starting to wonder how many ideas Eric July actually had to begin with. And the reason I say that is because I remember reading Alphacore #1. Yep, here's my copy, Alphacore #1. This is my reading copy here. And at the end of Alphacore #1, Chuck Dixon had this to say. Long story short, Eric asked me if I'd like to do some writing in the Rippaverse. The rules were simple. I'd write a graphic novel further developing the superpowered cops who patrol the skies and streets of Florispark. That was it. I was free to create, imagine, and build whatever I wanted within this new reality. That was it. That was it. That was all the instruction he was given. Here are the characters. Now go do something with them. And what concerns me about that is that there was no underlying story to begin with. I've tried to think up comic book universes myself. There's one that I still have in my mind that, who knows, maybe someday down the road, if I ever get into the crowdfunding thing, maybe I can bring this to fruition myself. But if I ever do, I know that I've at least got a story to start off each of these characters. I don't just have character ideas and then it's like, okay, now I have no idea where they go from there. I mean, I at least have a starting point where if I ever brought a writer in and I said, hey, here's what I need you to do. The first issue is going to be something like this. But in Eric July's case, he's got the characters, but he doesn't seem to have any idea what these characters are supposed to do beyond what they've already done in Isom #1 and Isom #2. I mean, where is the direction from that he gave Chuck Dixon as to, here's the story that I need from you because I want to introduce them and I want to take them in this particular direction and I want to see this coming together. And I mean, all it was is, here's my characters, go do something with them. Really? That's all you got. You don't have anything beyond that. You just have the basic character idea and no story to take them on from that point forward. I'm starting to wonder because, the Soska sisters, they've basically been given the job of keeping the lore, and they have the lore, the Bible of the Rippaverse. There's a Rippaverse Bible out there somewhere. And I'm starting to wonder if that Bible is about that thick. because how do you not have an initial story to take these characters on? How do you just basically throw your characters into somebody's lap and say, do whatever? Don't hurt the basic property, but that's all you got. So maybe there's really just not that much sitting there such that Eric can feel like he's got confidence in where people are going to take these stories. Because I mean, I don't know. I mean, when he got the script from Chuck Dixon, was he like, oh my God, this is everything I ever dreamed of? Or was he like I would have been, which is kind of like, this is all right. And then realizing that this is all right might not be the level of quality that you want your company to try and sustain itself on. I'm looking at it from the perspective of, okay, how much originality do you actually have behind the scenes of this Rippaverse company? You know, you've got the characters and you've probably got a little backstory written for them, but you don't have any idea where this universe is going to go at all. That to me is strange. I mean, it's going to be interesting to see what happens in Yaira, to see if what the Saska sisters have put together has anything to do with the stuff that goes on in Alphacore, or has anything to do with the stuff that has gone on so far in Isom #1 or Isom #2. I mean, who knows? I mean, it could be going through some, basic pattern, but just not having any real direction. That kind of concerns me. And so when I realized that there might not be that much material, Real Nerdy Review says, yo, Mr. DJ Fly High. Mike, I will say Rippaverse are not bored, but annoyed, especially with the constant social media drama. That's very interesting, because I will get to his non-apology in a little bit. One of the things that I was wondering, though, is why is he asking the fans for genres? Is it because he really doesn't have anything in the tank beyond his characters, and he doesn't even know what genres they fit? Because he's got the character ideas, but he doesn't know where these characters would necessarily take a person. And you would think that's kind of obvious. I mean, he does say in his video where he's asking for the genre ideas that Bloodruth goes in a more fantasy direction. But it's almost as if he's asking permission, as if to say, can I take her in that direction? Or are there characters that you want me to focus on more? Or what are we going to do next? It's like he's asking the fans to lead him where the Rippaverse should go, because he has no idea himself where it should go. And that to me is like, oh my God, really? Because the whole idea behind creating one of these universes, you would think, would be to tell a particular kind of story behind this universe. I mean, when you've seen Valiant, when you've seen Comics Greatest World, when you've seen some of the earlier work of Defiant, things like that. Well, two of them are by Jim Shooter, I grant you. But they all kind of coalesced toward a particular idea, a particular event that would then allow them to, that then change the game and would then allow them to spring off from that event into other directions. But what we're seeing here in the Rippaverse is not that kind of plan. It's almost like there is no roadmap to the Avengers, if you will. And maybe that can work, because, again, he doesn't have exactly the talent that's going to be coming in. We don't know anybody behind the Saska sisters, Mike Barron, and what's his name, Chuck Dixon, who are going to be writing this thing. So who's got the wheel? Who's got the wheel? Okay, Andrew Rowland says, I've accepted Eric's apology, but it doesn't mean I'm going to be sucking his dick all the time. Mr. DJ Fly High, I mean, it's better than comic companies doing fan polls. Real Nerdy Review says, it's like I say, stay open-minded. Hope Yaira does good. I haven't followed any recent news he's posted on the Rippaverse. There really hasn't been any news, although he has mentioned that they're at MegaCon this weekend in Orlando. There is supposed to be a major announcement there. And I have a feeling it's probably going to be who is the artist on Gooding, because that's the only real announcement that's going on. Either that, or he's going to announce what the Chuck Dixon project is. Hopefully that'll be something of interest. Andrew Rowland, in the manga Bakuman, it makes a really good point that you never let the fans tell you how to write your story, because if you do, it's no longer your story. Yeah, and that is what sounds kind of desperate about this call for genres. It's almost like, where do you want me to go? Because I swear I will write wherever the money is. That's not the same as having a vision. That's not the same as having an idea of what it is you want to put out in the world. It's like he's got a slate of characters and he's got a story for Isom for Isom's first arc, but beyond that, who knows if he's got anything? And he's just relying on either his writers or the fans to tell him, okay, what is it what will you buy? Because the money is what's going to keep this thing self-sustaining, and so that's, of course, what he's going to be focusing on. Bezzy, well, he carbon copied mainstream, and that goes against his entire identity. Just like Yaira is Wonder Woman, a Supergirl ripoff, how is he going to turn that into something unique? Could wind up unique. I mean, it's kind of funny how little it actually takes to make a unique property. There are things that are not really that different. What would you say? Like Icon. I mean, Icon was he's an alien who was rocket shipped to Earth and raised by a family in America. It just so happens that he was raised by a black family of slaves in the 1830s. And that's pretty much enough to change the whole Superman mythology into, either Mark Waid's Strange Fruit or the Icon series. So, that's kind of a minor twist on the character that had major consequences. So yeah, I mean, it could still wind up being something that's original. Yaira is probably the one that I've got the most hope for at this point because I've seen everything else that's come out so far. So when Yaira comes out and the Saska sisters, I just feel like they have this potential, and if they manage to tap into that potential, then they'll do well. It's really help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi. You're my only hope at this point. No matter what the sisters write, she's Wonder Woman. Yeah, but still, I mean, and what is Wonder Woman today? But like a female Thor. It's kind of sad. Wonder Woman used to have much more of a personality. In fact, God, when George Perez was writing and drawing Wonder Woman, both writing and drawing Wonder Woman, that was one of the most awesome Wonder Woman arcs there was. I don't think anything before or after has compared with that. And I wish somebody would be able to capture that spirit that George Perez had brought to Wonder Woman at that time and just manage to capture that in a bottle or something, so just let it out for us. I don't really feel like anybody, I mean, not from, oh God, not Greg Rucka, not George, not Jeff Johns. I mean, Jeff Johns, I mean, he made Wonder Woman into his avatar of love. I'm like, excuse me? I mean, she broke a guy's neck. I mean, give me a break. Mr. DJ Fly High, what's the difference between what Eric is doing in DC Comics, for example, when they did a poll to kill off Robin? Yeah, that's not a bad comparison, but at the same time, did they do that all the time? That's not how they started out. They did that as a gimmick, true. But this isn't so much a gimmick as his stated intent to basically do whatever it is his buying fans want. I think there was probably a real question among the editors and among the writers over at DC about what do we do with this Jason Todd kid? I mean, he's kind of just a Robin ripoff more than a Robin. And we don't know where to go with him. Do we want to just render him comatose for a while, or do we want to kill him off entirely? And we'll see where the Batman mythos go from that. And somebody came up with the wild idea to leave it up to the fans. And did you know that out of about, I want to say it wasn't more than 20,000 votes. It was somewhere, I want to say it was around 12,000 votes that people called in. And I unfortunately I didn't get a chance to call in because I got a copy of the Batman comic that didn't have the phone-in number with it. So I never got to register my opinion. I was going to say, let the kid live, because I was too new to the Batman comics at that time, at least that run of Batman at that time, that I didn't want to see a big shakeup. So I was hoping that he'd actually survive. He died by a factor of 72 votes. And I'm just going to, let me bring up a calculator here. 72 votes divided by, and I still want to say it was about 12,000 votes recorded. That's 0.006. That's 0.6% of your voting population right there made the call. That was an amazingly close vote. But again, that was just basically saying, okay, we have this particular character. Which direction are we going to take the book in? And they didn't do that for all of their books. It wasn't something that they did, nor did they send a call out saying, who is it that you want to see more of? I don't know. I mean, that's not a bad comparison in terms of, an established company who has already been putting out storylines and taking the characters wherever it is they want. Finally, just basically asking in this particular case, what do you want us to do with this character? But it hits different with the Rippaverse just on account of they're so new in the game. I mean, this isn't supposed to be a choose your own adventure universe, as far as I know. I thought that there were stories that Eric had in his pocket, that he was this great creative visionary who, saw this whole universe unfolding before him with the rich history and all this kind of stuff. And so far, so little of that has hit the page. And maybe the fact that there's so little of it at all is why so little of it has hit the page. Why is it that we don't know Isom's powers by now? Why is it that we don't know Avery's history from issue 1? Why is it that we haven't seen anything about the War of Separation? Well, if there's only really that much material in the Rippaverse Bible, maybe there's not that much story to tell. And maybe that's why things have been progressing as slowly as they have been, because he's afraid that he is going to run out completely of the material that he knows he's got. So that was something that really just sent a chill up my spine, to the point where I was like, oh my God, is the Rippaverse just going to collapse within the next couple of years due to lack of ideas? And if he brings in talent who's capable of sustaining and staying with the Rippaverse for a good long period of time, then he can keep those ideas coming, because the ideas will come from his stable of writers and his stable of artists. And sometimes you can get a Marvel style thing going where the artists are doing their share of the heavy lifting. But wow, I'm just starting to realize that maybe there's just not that much going on. And the other thing that worried me is the fact that he had to make the call in the first place to say, hey, is there anything that you want to see? Because you would think if there was really all of this excitement around the Rippaverse, if there was really all this buzz and all this jazz and all of this, real enthusiasm, then you would think that he wouldn't need to ask the fan base, what do you want to see next? He would be seeing people in the Reddit forums, in his own website forums, whatever kinds of, he does live streams, for God's sakes, with Rippaverse fans. Where are all the fans telling him, I want to see this, I want to see this? Where are they? If he's having to put the call out and say, hey, what do you want to see? Because it almost sounds like he must be hearing crickets out there. And that's not a good sign. Let's see, the Real Nerdy Review. I remember Puma Fist saying Rippa didn't know where he wanted to go with his book. He was waiting until the fans wrote the story for him. For the overall Rippaverse, that may be true in a sense. I was thinking more along the lines of, if he's got 3 or 4 characters, like he's got Norfolka, he's got Bloodruth. Okay, so Norfolka and Bloodruth, they occupy roughly the same kind of space, you would think, because Norfolka deals with demons, as they're patrolling as a rock band on Earth or something, and they're fighting demons or something like that. Whereas Bloodruth, she's got her castle and she deals with creatures coming out of these pocket dimensions and such. So they occupy kind of the same space. And if he wanted to take those in 2 different directions, then I think it would be more reasonable for him to have asked, which of these two books do you want to see first? Do you want to see Norfolka first, or do you want to see Bloodruth first? Or whichever genre corresponded to the particular title in question. If Bloodruth is going to be more a fantasy element and Norfolk is going to be more of a horror element, then ask that. Which do you want to see? Which do you want to see the Rippaverse tangle with first, or which are you more wanting to see the Rippaverse handle? Do you want what did I just say? Fantasy or horror? And then based on that, come out with that book next. So I'm almost wondering if he's trying to figure out what do I do next after Yaira and Isom #3, as if he doesn't really have a plan beyond the Chuck Dixon event book, which I think is coming next. And I know he's coming out with an Alphacore #2. I know he's coming out with a Yaira #2. We've already got those guaranteed. So that's why I'm a little bit confused. It's like, why do you even have to ask these questions? Because you've got enough material, you've got enough creative teams so far to get at least somewhat of a steady thing going, like where you're coming out with a book maybe every 3 months. And then as you keep adding them, you can ask the audience, like, well, what do you want to see now? I'm more jazzed about seeing Norfolka than I would be about seeing Bloodruth. I'd be happy to contribute that. And then have him, take the Rippaverse in that direction and say, okay, that's who I'll have a story about next. I don't know. It's just, it's disconcerting to realize that there just might not be that much material to the Rippaverse from its foundation. I'm trying to think of like the various stable of characters that I've got, and I can think of at least, the general arcs for those characters that I have for, so far on, like it probably bore the hell out of you if I tried to explain it to you. I mean, I never did come out with the stuff myself, so obviously it didn't inspire me enough to go and do it. So I'll just leave that on the side. The Dead End says, for $35 a book that he's charging, I would hope there'd be a clear roadmap and end goal. Well, the price has come down. Alphacore was $28 as opposed to $35. Still on the pricey side when you consider tax and shipping, but better than it was. Real Nerdy Review says, was Eric asking fans which genre should he take his work into on a live stream or short video? It was on the Canon's for Canon's sake, and then he clipped a segment of For Canon's Sake and put that onto a short video. So it's within like 2 or 3 of his latest videos. Marilith 2005 said George Perez, rest in peace, had the best Wonder Woman. Yes, he did. Absolutely. Bezzy says if Isom 1 and 2 delivered, he would have his flagship character to branch off from. To me, he's jumped the gun creatively. Avery isn't a strong enough character to hold up the universe. Well, I think Isom was originally intended to bring people, a knowledge of the basic characters, but then to have them stand in their own right. And now he's got an Alphacore title. He's got the Yaira title. He'll eventually have a Bloodruth and a Norfolka title. So there's plenty of space for Isom to now develop on its own in some direction and not necessarily have to be that springboard from which everything else happens. In fact, it would probably be better for the character overall to see, okay, now that Avery's back, what is he going to do? What's his focus going to be? Because for the book to just be, here's Isom going about his business, and then, here's all these other new characters being introduced, that's going to get real old real fast. I mean, it's already getting old with Isom #2. So I don't think there's much chance that Isom is going to continue going in the same vein of being a springboard for the rest of the Rippaverse. I think it'll probably simmer down some to where the story focuses more on Avery, and maybe this is where Avery is going to meet Norfolka. Maybe this is where that to me almost would be the best second arc. Would be Avery meets Norfolka, and from there, Norfolka can spring off into their own book. And the reason I say that is because Norfolka had no other reason to be in Isom #1 other than that they were going to have their paths intersect at some time in the future. And I would really prefer to see that happen. Plus, if you go back and you watch my video on how to keep the how to keep the Isom #2 trailer from becoming a multiverse dimension. Yeah, look for the video on did Rippaverse Studios break the Rippaverse Code of Ethics? He needs to meet Norfolka, and he needs to meet them quick and find out about their powers, or else we could have a potential multiverse situation on our hands. The Dead End says there should have been Rippaverse #0 that introduces everyone and let Isom just be its story. That's one way to do it, but I don't really have a problem with the introduction of Yaira and Alphacore and whatnot in the Isom #1. I don't really have a problem with that. I think I had more of a problem with all of these other characters being shoved into Isom #2, that it just felt jam-packed and overstuffed. But Isom #1, I mean, I keep telling people this, and I don't know if they believe me, but I felt like Isom #1 was good overall, except for all the flaws. If it wasn't for all the flaws, it would have been a good book. Rippaverse Goalposts. What are a few genres that are currently performing well in the indie community? I have no idea. I really have no idea, because I don't really follow the indie community except for Comicsgate. I mean, I watch Ethan Van Sciver's podcasts, his live streams, and that's pretty much all I've seen, except for Eric's stuff. And I don't really watch Eric's live streams anymore because they're not really that interesting to me. He doesn't talk quite as much about the Rippaverse itself as he used to. So yeah, as far as the genres within, I think there's like a lot of fantasy. I mean, when you look at like Battle Brick Road and Dragon Lords, Dragon Age, something like that. There's kind of the fantasy element there. Fiendish is another good example of the fantasy element mixed with horror at that point. Then you've got the superhero stuff. You've got Cyberfrog. You've got some Art T Bears Black and White. You've got Graveyard Shift by Malin. I don't know if there's a category necessarily that Shane Davis's Inglorious Rex fits into. Yeah, so I don't know about genres there. To me, it's just kind of like, okay, it's nice to have genres lined up. I mean, definitely that's the way that CrossGen went when it began. I don't know how many people remember CrossGen, but it started with CrossGen Chronicles #1, and in that book, you were introduced to four different stories, most of them occupying different genres. Like you had, let's see, what were the four stories for there? You had Mystic, which dealt with a young woman who accidentally acquired a sigil that gave her like all the powers, the mystical powers of her world. And then Sigil, which dealt with science fiction, and that a guy got imprinted with a sigil that gave him amazing powers. There was a kind of a common theme through a lot of this stuff, but at the same time, they occupied different worlds, and that's what kind of made the difference. Meridian was the tale of a young woman who she, along with her evil uncle, got a sigil attached to them, where she got like growth and healing powers, and he got destruction and decay powers. And then you had Scion, where a young man who was branded with the sigil wound up being able to construct an energy sword that upset the political balance of his world. So there was a lot of variation on a theme within that universe, the whole CrossGen universe, and then they spread out from there to more and more things until you had things like Route 666 was one of the more interesting ones, where you had a young woman who was capable of seeing the monsters that lived among us. And then you had Sojourn, which was more of a straight up fantasy story about a young woman whose family was killed by the undead ruler of their world, and she had to try and go on an epic quest to figure out how to kill him. There were so many interesting things going on around there. The Path was something that Bart Sears was on. It kind of was divergence for him from his standard heavy, hyper-bodied art, and went more into the like Japanese feudalism and things like that. And then you had the first, which of course was a collection of gods. And I think Andy Smith worked on that. And Andy Smith would go on to do his Kordrath the Reckoning, which is in the fantasy genre. So let's see, what else have we got here? Mudbutt says, every Isom book should have been a one and done story like old pulp hero stories. All crowdfunders should be, actually. Possibly, I think that's probably the way you want to go if you're, I mean, the problem with that, you would think, is that how do you keep your reader interested? How do you make sure that your reader is going to buy the next one? Sometimes having a cliffhanger of some sort is the best way to do that. So maybe getting your reader interested beforehand. I mean, I really had no problem with the idea of Isom being a multi-part story. In fact, that's what made me so shocked when the buyer count dropped from issue 1 to issue 2. They had like 43,000 buyers for issue number 1, and then it dropped down to like, oh God, what was it? 22,000 buyers for issue number 2. I mean, that was practically a 50% drop. And I looked at that and thought, how did that happen when you knew going in that you were going to be buying part 1 of a 3-part arc, and it was still enough to turn off what they actually received in Isom number 1 was still enough to turn off a good portion of the readers. That was just really shocking to me. Minka says Dragon Rage. Yep, that was one. Marilla 2005. Omega Storm went to some really dark places from what I heard. Yeah, that's, well, if the spoiler panel that Ethan Van Sciver shared is any indication. Yep. The Dead End. The new Transformers Energon universe books are a great example of world building with Void rivals before going into Transformers and G.I. Joe proper books. Great stuff. You know, I feel like Void Rivals overall has been a pretty weak book. I didn't care for that much. I didn't think it made for that good of a jumping off point for the Transformers to come back to us. I think I would have been a lot more interested if it had started in the G.I. Joe books, like Duke number 1. If Duke number 1 had actually introduced the Transformers back to us, and then we got Transformers, and then, you know, jumped from there over to Cobra Commander. And Cobra Commander, geez, that's a weird book. That is a weird take on the character right there, I'll tell you what. Mr. DJ Fly High says, just curious, do you think Eric will be more open-minded to criticism after Isom number 2? I don't see why. I mean, at what point do you think he's been? I mean, the only way that he would be more open to criticism is if he basically took his Isom number 3 script and he handed it to Chuck Dixon or he handed it to Mike Barron and say, hey, I trust you guys to tell me if I'm really screwing something up. Can you give me, you know, some feedback, or, you know, try and find things that are wrong with the script that could be improved. But I could have sworn he had Chuck Dixon around when Isom number 2 was under development. So I don't know why he didn't take advantage of him then. I mean, that's really what I want to see in terms of proof of criticism. You know, proof that he could take criticism would consist of this. You know, take Isom number 2, which is an absolute garbage book, but you don't have to cast it like that. You could just basically tell him, look, okay, here's Isom number 2. Can you tell us something that someone told you about your original script for Isom number 2 that you thought, oh, that's really a good idea. I should change my original script and do this instead. And then tell us how that impacted the book. Because that way, you know, you're not basically dissing the book. You're actually saying, okay, I know there had to have been something that somebody pointed out was not good with the original script and got improved along the way. You know, so what was one of those things? And then he could basically show off what it is in the book that he took criticism on. Because the way that I guess I've been asking about it in the past, and I made a little video on this, was the fact that I was always putting it in terms of, okay, now that Alphacore, or now that Isom #1 is out, do you see something in Isom #1 that you could have done better? And he's like, you're seriously asking me to crap on my own book? And I'm like, okay, good point. So if you could put in other terms like, okay, you turned in your original script, which is not the finished product that we see on the stands. Okay, so we're not criticizing the finished product. What about your original script? Does somebody point out to you and say, that's really not the best way to do that? You really ought to try doing this. And you took that person's advice. And then, because then he could say, see, I listened. I put that in the book. I listened. And that way he would have the bragging rights for that without having to dump on his book, which is a dumpster fire anyway. Let's see. The Dead End says, that's fair. I'm digging what they've done so far. You're going to live Duke #2. Yeah, I think I saw something about, or I think I might have skimmed that one. Mr. DJ Fly High, I was also talking more of the artwork as well. Well, the artwork for Isom #2, yeah, I know there's that whole thing about 3D modeling and using the 3D assets and whatnot. And definitely it's kind of awkward when you see like some of the stuff that Cliff Richards has drawn in the past that looks almost identical to the Isom #2 stuff, like especially when he goes to his house and it's the same house as was drawn in some other comic book, and I don't remember what comic book that was. But yeah, I mean that's kind of awkward to see the same furniture arrangements and things like that. But for someone like me who's never seen any of that before, I mean, I'm just looking at the artwork and thinking, okay, well, this is good. I mean, it's not getting in the way of the story for the most part. I don't really have that huge problem with 3D assets that Ethan Van Sciver does, because as long as it's good artwork in the end product, I don't mind. I mean, my problem comes more with when the artwork does things like in Isom #1, you had them jumping at each other in the big about to collide scene, and then you don't see them collide. That's more of a problem to me than the fact that I'm sure 3D assets were used all the hell in order to make that scene. I mean, now we know, but I don't really mind that as long as you can figure out ways to do that in kind of fresh, original, so that the scenes aren't becoming repetitive. I don't want to see I don't want to see repetition. And so far, I haven't seen that. I don't feel like when I've gone through Isom #1 and Isom #2, I don't feel like I'm watching the same book play out over and over again. I don't feel like I'm seeing the same scenes. And that to me would be the real fear if I were using 3D assets. It's like, oh, is what I'm doing like so close to what I did before in the previous books that somebody's going to notice I'm just kind of, doing the same things. I don't feel like that's happening. So, when people are criticizing Cliff Richards' artwork for that, I think they're just, I don't know. Sometimes I feel like they're just envious. Oh my gosh, you mean he can do that and do that for like half the work that I put in to everything? I mean, are people even appreciating all the work that I put in to do this book? And they're eating up this stuff instead. I feel like there's an envy thing going on there, that someone is actually able to produce not similar quality work, because nobody's going to draw like Ethan Van Sciver is. Nobody's going to draw like Shane Davis does using 3D assets, but you will at least turn out a minimum level of quality with that product that will be more satisfactory than some of the stuff that I see coming out of more established artists. I mean, we've all probably read something by Jeff Lemire, and sometimes you wonder how in the hell he thought. Jeff Lemire draws like Tom Petty sang. I mean, you look at Tom Petty and think, how the hell did this guy ever think that he could sing? And did he hear himself in the shower someday and it just sounded totally different to him than it did to everyone else? And he put out some great music, but I always thought, I don't know if I could have gotten up and started singing if I had that voice. And I mean, my voice has only ever been like karaoke quality. But my gosh, I don't know. To have Jeff Lemire draw the way that he does, I mean, he eventually gets stuff. Yeah, I don't know. There's some of his stuff that I know is like really famous that I was never able to get into, like Sweet Tooth. I just could never get into that book. I tried like about 3 or 4 times. I have a bad feeling it's going to be like The Wire. I've been watching that on HBO Max, and I'm at the 3rd episode again, and I'm just bogging down. 2 episodes, and I got bored, and I have a feeling I'm just going to get bored again. I don't know what I'm going to do with that series, if I'm going to actually watch it. I want to watch it just because somebody said it's like the most accurate depiction of police work when it comes to taking down drug gangs, that this is what they really have to do. But it's so dull, and it just makes me feel bad for policemen. Let's see. Mike Wilson art. The thing that killed Isom for me was digital tread that was used for shading. I don't know. I didn't have a problem with that. Loyal says, I finally caught another stream, but to answer the stream question, there was much to be desired after the first issue. Well, yeah. I mean, the first issue, as far as Isom *1 went, I felt like I did want to see where this thing is going. You know, I had not lost interest. The only thing I was really disappointed by was the level of quality, in terms of, here's another error, here's a spelling error, well, there really weren't any spelling errors in Isom *1. There was one instance where there was an extra word that was thrown in, and that's a shame, but sometimes it happens. But here's where the emphasis should have been placed elsewhere. Here was the trucks, here was the stairs, But all of the little things that just pissed me off as I was going through that, thinking to myself, I shouldn't have to, I shouldn't have to hit all these speed bumps when I'm reading through it. Let's see what else we got. Rippaverse Gold Post. 1 book per month would be incredible. Yes, it would. Some fans asked Eric if there will be a paid subscription where customers get automatic delivery of books. That would be quite the thing. That would be quite the thing, because I think, if he knows he can get regular money and doesn't have to worry about, is somebody going to buy this or not? Based on your subscriber base, how it is you're doing. That's kind of an excellent idea right there. And I think that the Rippaverse could probably pull that off just on the strength of sheer novelty. If you get enough properties going, and they're different properties, and you can get all this stuff, happening where the reader just knows that, okay, once a month I'm going to get a book, and it's going to be of at least some minimum level of quality that is acceptable, which I don't feel like the Rippaverse is at now. Then the whole idea of just being able to crank out a book a month for a subscription fee, that would be pretty awesome, both for him and for his customers. Let's see. Samurai Snowman, mine's on the way. Not sure exactly what that means. Old Texas Ronin. I was very excited for the Rippaverse in the beginning, but after buying the first 3 comics and seeing the art and story quality so far, I want them to go play in traffic on Pleasant Run Road. Is that a reference to my hometown? Because we had a Pleasant Run. That was actually the main street that ran through my hometown. Mike Wilson art, that would be cool. As far as I assume you don't mean playing in traffic on Pleasant Run Road. I assume you mean the subscription service. So yeah, if the Rippaverse can put together enough books to be self-sustaining and come out with 1 book a month, and I'm talking a 90-page book a month, something that's substantive, where you've got multiple creative teams working on things throughout the year. And maybe in order to give them time, you have these event books that, you can fit things in or something like that, crossover books, who knows, just to make sure that there's enough time given. Then that could work out. Because there must be a point. I would think that with the large fan base he started with, there must be a point at which he can just start cranking this stuff out, and then maybe expand the warehouse portion of the business so that that's also Maybe the comic books become actually more of a lost leader into the warehousing business. I don't know. The business side of things is always going to stymie me because I just haven't dealt with any of that. But I do see that it could potentially become a self-sustaining company if things get to a frequency of publishing that is sufficient and of sufficient quality. Well, that was the first topic I had on my list. The second topic was Eric July's non-apology apology. So did anybody see that video where apparently, he let loose with that screed about people attacking the Soska sisters? And then at the end, he drops this F-bomb that's not, the 4-letter word, it's the 6-letter word. And he actually went back and edited that tweet or post, whatever it was, and he asterisked that out except for the starting F. And I looked at that and I was like, oh my God. Yeah. It's one thing to hear it over and over again in various YouTube videos, because apparently YouTube has been pretty lenient about people who use that word as an insult. But to see it actually in print was kind of jarring. And when he came out with his video talking about his apology to the fans or something like that, and you had that picture, that thumbnail of Yaira and was it Yaira and Isom and Solari, and they were all looking at him with a mean look saying, "You need to evolve." That was very, very much a bait and switch kind of video, because you would look at that and think from the headline and the thumbnail that he was apologizing for using that particular word, which you must think, would alienate at least a portion of his reader base. I mean, I can't imagine that every single one of his readers is heterosexual. So I'm looking at that and thinking to myself, I wonder if the Soska sisters have injected quite a bit of soy into this guy, that he's actually apologizing for that word. But he, in fact, did not apologize for using that word. Instead, he was apologizing just for, oh, I got off track again, and now I need to get back and focus on my business, and I gotta worry more about what the fans think than what the haters think, and blah blah blah. Same stuff that he's been saying every other time that he loses his temper and rattles off something. And I don't know. I thought it was a very funny bait and switch video, because that's how some news articles work, is that they give you a headline and the headline says one thing, and then you actually go into the body of the article and it's something that actually argues against the headline. But you'd never know if you didn't actually click in and see what it was that was being said. So I thought it was kind of sneaky on there. But anyway, Rippaverse, or let's see, hold on, Merilith 2005. I feel the ministry had a hand on that print change, but that's just my option. That print. Oh, I tell you what, after all of the stuff that has been revealed about the Soska sisters' prior ventures, I bet the ministry is kicking itself now that it hadn't waited until it found out even more about them, because oh my God, if they had known about those particular movie ventures and other things, they would be like, we're a Christian ministry, and he's hired people that have done these things. I mean, there's going to be terrible brand confusion. They're probably kicking themselves now over whatever settlement that they actually got. Rippaverse goalpost. No more campaigns, subscription model, automatic shipments, experienced group of writers and artists, multiple titles that will attract new fans after they see the consistency of the company. So long as the quality's good. It's got to be consistent quality, or else the thing's going to fall apart. I mean, Valiant, look at what Valiant did. I mean, Valiant was, they were consistent in terms of shipping 4 books a month, but I couldn't even be bothered to pick up anything by them, because everything that they did was just so inferior compared to the prior Jim Shooter run that I just don't even understand what. And the thing is, well, I really shouldn't say that, because there have been some very interesting endeavors by Valiant Comics that did hit a little bit. For example, there was the Divinity trilogy by Matt Kent, and that was basically his replacing the gap that was left by their not having the license to Solar, Man of the Atom. That was pretty interesting because he actually came up with some ideas that they're just such mind screws. I mean, there were 2 points in his, I think it was Divinity 3, or maybe it was Divinity 2 and Divinity 3. There were a couple of points in the trilogy where he actually referred to things that happened in our world, like a story that had been written in our world, or a massacre that had happened in our world. And then he screwed with the details so that it wasn't actually like it was in history. We were being fed a false history by him at the same time that we were trying to absorb what had happened to the world of Valiant. And what had happened in the world of Valiant is that everybody was being psychically fed a false history. So he was doing to us the same thing that was being done to all of the other characters. And it was just a complete mind screw. And then there was another arc. It was Wrath of the Eternal Warrior. And it showed, I think it was called Labyrinth, and it showed Gilad, the Eternal Warrior, who can basically come back from dying again and again and again, having to go through this labyrinth where there are all these death traps designed to kill him. And as he goes through, he gets killed a different way each time, and then has to figure out how to overcome that death trap, and then come back and then finally escape from the labyrinth. And it was a good series. I enjoyed that one. I felt a little bit weird about the fact that every time he dies, he goes to this grove in his mind where his wife and his children are waiting for him, and he has to reject them and then go back and fight his way back to life. That's kind of screwy, but I guess it kind of worked. Let's see. Bezzy, experienced writers and artists seems nice, except Eric falls out with people a lot. He's a butch drama queen. I can't see him operating larger creative teams without causing absolute chaos among them. Yeah, and maybe that's one of the reasons why he's got the Soska sisters to, just basically ride herd on people and make sure that they don't go outside the lines. So we'll see how their Yaira stacks up, and we'll see how Gooding stacks up. It's basically all we can do right now is just wait and see. So let's see. What's the third item I had here? That story sounded like Ashura's Wrath. Yeah, I haven't heard of that story. Comicsgate Hypocrisy. Yes. I'm starting to get turned off by the attitude that is being displayed online by Ethan Van Sciver toward the Soska sisters, and it really is starting to feel like, I want freedom, and I want the ability to be in the comic book space and not be bothered about my political beliefs or about things that I've done, et cetera, et cetera. And I just want to be able to be free to talk about whoever I want to talk about and state my opinions and blah, blah, blah. And then the moment someone claims that same freedom for themselves, he's like, oh, no, I didn't mean you. It's like, it's not exactly the same thing, but it's really starting to grate on me to the point where I feel like I'm equating the two. Because this has to do with the whole reciprocity thing that Eric July threatened Ethan Van Sciver with in that night letter that he sent him via text. Ethan was basically disagreeing with Eric in the public square, partnering up with other people like Nick Rekieta, like Dick Masterson, who also disagreed with Eric about the direction of Isom, the direction of the lawsuits, et cetera, and the direction of crowdfunding, which way crowdfunding should go in the comic book space. And I'm looking at that and I'm thinking, okay, well, he's getting to say whatever it is he wants. And maybe that makes Eric look bad. Maybe it doesn't. And then Eric comes and sends him a message and saying, look, I don't like what you're doing. And if you're not going to stop, then I'm going to feel free to do the same thing. And after that, Ethan felt like he had to hold his tongue. Now, he didn't. And I really feel surprised that when Eric's basically saying, look, I'm going to claim the same right to say things that are in disagreement with what you have to say. I'm going to bring people on who have disagreements with you about those things, and basically adopt the same tactics that you're adopting with me. I don't understand why the proper way to view that is not just to say, okay, put your ideas out there. I'll put my ideas out there. We'll both have a go at it. And then we'll just see who wins in the marketplace of ideas. That to me is just fair. Why was Eric July restraining himself from having people on the show talking smack about Ethan? Well, I guess he was doing it as a favor, but yeah, if Ethan's not going to return the favor, then why should he continue the favor? And I don't feel like there is this huge malevolence coming from Eric on that respect, saying that, hey, I'm going to, just absolutely dogpile your company and drive you out of business. That didn't seem to be the consistency of the Night Letter at all. But now here we have another situation where, Ethan is talking about how back in the day he had to, keep himself silent and not mention his political leanings and all this kind of stuff because it would have been bad for his career if people were to know about his conservative views. And it was when his conservative views were open and exposed, and he was celebrating Trump's victory and all that kind of stuff, that he got ousted from DC Comics and then had to go into doing Comicsgate and crowdfunding. And now here come the Soska sisters, and they come from a background where their material and stuff, they've been involved in political ideas that he finds execrable, that he finds twisted. which they would probably say, yes, we are, because I think they go by Twisted Twins on Twitter. And then now they're not supposed to enjoy that same kind of safe space that independent comics has become for people who have controversial views. I definitely, if they have the views that they have been described as having, and I don't see anything that indicates the contrary, then I don't share those views. But there have been a lot of writers and artists and actors and actresses whose views politically I have not shared, and yet I can still appreciate good work that has been done by them. And so my feeling is, why is it that you, as a conservative writer and artist, are supposed to be allowed to work in this space, to work for, yourself and be able to do what it is you do? But when they try to latch on to the Rippaverse and contribute positively to Eric July's company, somehow they're being singled out on account of their views and politics and whatnot. I'm like, can we just have an even playing field here? I feel like I always thought, and this is how I defended Comicsgate originally, was that Comicsgate was not about, saying that there can only be one kind of politics within comics. Comicsgate was just basically saying, don't let your politics overshadow the characters. Don't let your politics overshadow the stories. You can still have your politics in the stories if you want. I mean, God knows, if you look back at the stuff that Neil Adams did back in the day for Continuity Comics, I mean, his stuff was like, oh God, he would have loved the current climate change craze. I mean, he'd probably be throwing cans of paint at the Mona Lisa himself. I mean, maybe that's not exactly a fair thing to say about him, but in terms of how much his comics were focused on things like global warming and pollution and all of the ways that the earth could be corrupted and whatnot, there were his politics were just woven throughout his comics. And there are other artists and writers who do the same thing. Andrew Vax, he has written a ton on child abuse and the criminal mind. And one of the things that he basically is doing is he's trying to he's trying to make his books polemics on these topics, on mental illness, on child abuse, on the effects of crime and things like that. And he wants people to understand his political point of view, but he takes all that and he marbles it into the story like you marble fat into meat in order to make the meat more palatable. And in that way, you're not shoving things down the reader's throat that the reader just can't digest. You make it digestible to the reader. Ethan's got political themes running through Cyberfrog. I mean, he's stated explicitly that he's got his own ideas of politics and his own idea of where the culture has gone. And, you know, the having Cyberfrog wake up 20 years later and see this society that he can barely recognize now, of course, because it's been taken over by alien insects, but the idea being that the insects represent the social justice warriors that have permeated through the social atmosphere of the planet. To have that in the book is making political inroads to the reader's mind. So why is he allowed to do that and not the Soska sisters? And it's not even clear that that's what the Soska sisters are even trying to do. We haven't even seen Yaira yet. We don't know anything about that book. The only thing we know about the book is that it's drawn by Deborah Carita and written by the Soska sisters, and it's supposed to come out in a couple of months, I think. That's it. That's all we got. We don't have anything to criticize. We don't have anything in hand. So why make such a big stink about what these people have done in the past, especially when you're not going to even look at what they've done in the realm of comic books in the past? Ethan's made no attempt to look at their work for Marvel, to look at their Black Widow run for Marvel, to look at their one-shot in Secret Wars Battle World for Marvel, that it exhibited what they're capable of doing and exhibited what they're likely to bring to the Rippaverse. If anything, don't go back to their movies, go to their comics and see what the comics have done. Have they been able to restrain themselves in the comics? I thought so. I certainly didn't come away feeling, grossed out by the Black Widow issues that I read. So, until there's a problem, don't make a problem. And honest to God, I'm starting to feel like so much of this is just driven by the fact that he can get money off of this now. He's very, very much incentivized by the trash casts to be as over the top hyped and against Rippaverse and against his old comic book compatriots who had turned on him as possible, because that's what gets the money. The outrage gets the money. And so long as the money's going to keep flowing, he's going to keep doing the same stuff, whether it's good for his image or not. And I don't see this kind of, it's not flagrant hypocrisy, but there is some hypocrisy there, just to say that, okay, because of what you've done externally to comics, I don't want to let you into the comics sphere. It's like, well, that's why they ousted you. Are you really going to be them? I don't know. I don't see it. Let's see. What else have we got here? Rippaverse Goalpost says his excuse is religious faith in going after the Soskas. Yeah, I mean, he's about as religious as Eric is. I mean, seriously. I mean, if you had to put it on just from what I've seen of them, I would probably put Ethan's religiosity above Eric July's religiosity. Of course, I don't know Eric July very well. I don't know Ethan very well. But honestly, they're about the same level. They're about the same level, which is basically, I trust in God that God's going to forgive me for everything I do. So I'm just going to go keep on being the same person I've always been and trust that God's just going to forgive me for it. Which is where a lot of Christians are. I mean, that's basically where a lot of people end up. That's the plane on which they end up, which is to say, well, God's forgiven me of all of my sins, so I can just be the same, POS that I've been my whole life, and I don't have to change, I don't have to improve, I don't have to worry about doing all that. I'm just not going to worry about it whatsoever. And a lot of that, of course, is a function of the Protestant once saved, always saved BS that is actually not part and parcel of authentic Christianity, and unfortunately, it has become such on account of Protestantism's severing itself from the churches. And of course, before that, the Catholic Church had long severed itself from the Orthodox Church. And this is starting to become a whole religious diatribe. So I'll just jump ahead to the point where I say, take the religious aspect and shove it. We're here for the comics. Mike Wilson Art says the problem is the institutions are run by leftists. Being conservative is being a minority. And that is true. But at the same time, what I would ideally like to see is comics and comics production be a realm in which what you're doing outside, the views you're espousing outside of comics don't affect your comics. Just as I would expect that, if somebody's going to show up, if some like flaming ass liberal is going to show up in a TV show that I'm watching, I'm not going to care unless that liberal distorts the show by his or her presence. For example, if somebody comes into the like here would be an example. I mean, there's a show out in which one of the characters is non-binary because the actor is non-binary. And I'm like, okay, forget this noise. I don't want to have anything to do with this program because I don't want to deal with this character. I don't want to deal with this aspect of, whatever is going on upstairs in my entertainment. But that's in the entertainment. Now, if that person was playing somebody who was instead, somebody who was, straight up male or female, then I'm not sure I'd have any problem with that character. So it all depends on how the art is portrayed and not who the artist is or what views the artist holds, unless that interferes with the work itself. And so far, we do not have it in evidence that the art, the work, that the art is going to be impacted by whatever it is the Soska sisters have done in the past. I mean, granted, everything, all their creative endeavors have shaped them into the people that they are today, and who have, basically made them into the comic book writers that they are today. But when you look at the comic book work itself, you don't see, at least I didn't see, the kind of, wildness, the kind of disgusting behavior that I have seen them exhibit in other of their creative works. And, they might actually be perfectly lovely people in person. But it's just, you got to keep that dividing line between the two. There's the artist and then there's the art. You're not always going to agree with everything the artist has to say, and the art is what you're really paying for. The art is what you're there to enjoy. If you think it's valuable, then pony up for it. If you don't, then don't. But I wouldn't really. I just can't think of too many times in my past that I've actually allowed my political disagreements or what have you with some such artist or this or that to actually keep me from enjoying that artist's work. And I don't see the value in doing that. I feel like that's just a means of self-deprivation as a kind of virtue signal. Rippaverse Goalpost says it's hypocritical behavior. He sees them as the enemy and wants to experience the same canceling he did. It's very easy to set personal values aside when the money is flowing. Yeah. Well, there is that. Okay, so the last item I had is... This one doesn't have much to do with comics, except that the person who I'm talking about draws a comic strip that you're probably familiar with. That would be Dilbert, which is now still in existence, although not in the newspapers, as Dilbert Reborn. Now the wheels have come, as far as the censorship or the self-censorship has completely come off, and Scott Adams is free to do all of the use his artistic creativity to the hilt behind his Locals platform. So now if you want to continue to enjoy the Dilbert cartoon, go to, I think it's scottadams.locals.com, and he has got all of his newest cartoons there. And the one thing that has been irritating me, though, is how he just absolutely will not take responsibility for his own part in his own cancellation. Now, I don't know how many people are familiar with the story, of what happened to Scott Adams. But Scott Adams was reading about a poll in which Black people were asked, is it okay to say it's okay to be white? And there was like a majority of Black respondents who said no. And based on that, Scott Adams literally said, and I couldn't believe it at the time when I heard it, but he literally said, I would just advise white people to stay the hell away from Black people. And I'm just like, oh, damn. Oh, my God. How do you freaking say that and not expect that to be used against you in the way that it absolutely was? Now, of course, within the context of all of his shows and within the context of everything that he had been trying to do to help the Black community from at that juncture in his life, it was understandable to see what it was that he was saying. He was basically trying to say, okay, if there is a large body of people who believe in such a way that they are willing to do you harm, which is, or have this absolutely negative view toward you, then, you might want to stay away from that, from that group of people. But to say it the way that he did, which was just outright, it sounded outright racist. And there is room to say, okay, if you look at it in nuance, if you look at it in context, but there's also room to say, dude, say it with nuance, say it with context. Don't just say something that white supremacists are going to put on their own, dialogue scribbled out Dilbert cartoons and then fill in that quote as if you have just justified their attitudes. And that's exactly what the white supremacists were doing at the time. They were basically saying, oh, Scott Adams has finally come around to our point of view. Hey, good way to go, Scott. Good for joining our team. And I was like, oh, God, they're milking this for all that it's worth. And it's so sad. But at the same time, he brought it on his damn self. And he absolutely refuses to take responsibility for it. He will go on, he will go on his podcast day after day after day and say, "Well, no one really disagrees with what I said. No one disagrees with what I said, and no Republican has condemned me for this." And I'm just like, what are you talking about? It is exactly what you said that got you in trouble. What you meant by it may not be offensive once you've had the chance to explain it, but first you got to get over that hurdle. And your words did not get you over that hurdle. So, God, I hate it when I wish I could find an easy way to link that to Comicsgate and to Rippaverse and the feud that's going on between the two of them, because there's got to be a way in which there's probably been some similarity. Oh, you said that to me. I mean, maybe the contents of the night letter would be a great way to look at that, where Ethan Van Sciver's saying, oh, he said reciprocate, and reciprocate to me is a threatening word, when really it's not anything of the kind, except unless you've been treating somebody badly, in which case they're really just kind of pointing out how you've been treating them. But at the same time, yes, in isolation, you can take something someone says and use it against them. And that's what happened with Scott Adams. And the problem is that Scott Adams will never fess up to the fact that he screwed up, that he blew it at that particular moment. And that is what got him shut down. He wound up losing his syndicators, and the syndicators are the ones who control his comic book his comic strips distribution to all the newspapers. And soon he was no longer published. And so he lost that portion of his income. Of course, he's probably got it all back now, because anybody who actually wanted to be reading Dilbert can now read it, and they can cancel their newspaper subscriptions instead. Which, God, I mean, when I had a newspaper subscription, that did not improve my life at all. I just want to say, when I had a newspaper subscription, I was reading like the crime section, I would read the Today section, I would read the opinion columns. I don't even understand why somebody necessarily wants to get a daily dose of news just straight out of a newspaper. It's almost like, okay, let me just read my daily dose of depression now. because that was all it was. I mean, my mental health improved so immensely once I stopped reading the newspaper that it was just ridiculous. And, now, of course, people sabotage their mental health by watching TikTok. They sabotage their mental health by scrolling through X. And I've just recently stopped following Scott Adams on X. Following, I say, because I don't actually have an X account anymore. But in his stuff, his material on X was largely a preview of everything that he was going to have on his daily shows anyway. And so I just kept thinking to myself, well, why do I want to see this? Why do I want to see a preview of what I'm going to be watching anyway? This is just wasting my time. It's just being a duplication of my time of my watching Scott Adams' efforts. And so now I just ignore that, ignore his account. Let's see. Andrew Rowland says, I'm just done with EVS at this point, continuing to bash Eric July, and it's getting obnoxious and annoying. Yeah, it is. I mean, especially because what we really need to see and what I will be seeing in the near future is whether or not his work actually rises to the level that he believes it does. Because obviously Eric July, thinks very highly of his own work. But, of course, Ethan Van Sciver is subject to that same possible level of self-delusion. I mean, Cyberfrog Blood Honey was a good book. I mean, it did have some flaws in it and minor things that needed adjustments. There were other things that he and I would disagree about what it needed in terms of maybe the camera angles or how to fill a panel or how to structure the pages, things like that. But in terms of the overall story, it at least got us to the portion where we're ready for the story now. And that's what REKT PLANET is basically going to be. So I'm going to be reading REKT PLANET in the near future and seeing whether or not all of the hype about this book measures up to all of, whether he really has room to deliver the kind of vitriol towards Eric July that he has been delivering. And I think that's one of the reasons why I have kind of put it off for so long, is that so long as I was still reviewing Rippaverse material, I didn't want to be reviewing Cyberfrog as a way to kind of balance that out, to just basically say, or to make it an antagonistic or what would you call it? A sympathetic review towards Cyberfrog to cancel out the antagonism toward the Rippaverse books, because the idea is not to promote Ethan's book over Eric's. The idea is to look at Ethan's book in its own merits and see whether or not it measures up. So I already know there are things about it that I'm going to find objectionable. The question is going to be whether I find enough about it that redeems it from the little objectionalities that I find along the way. So hopefully that will be the case. I'm still kind of rooting for him in this fight, so long as Eric July does not, respond to criticism. But he is making it more difficult to take a side. Let's see. How would I change? Oh, this is a good question. Rippaverse Goalpost. How would you change Bryan Solari's character in Alphacore? Okay, so here is the problem that I have with Bryan Solari. He is presented as, how would I define Bryan Solari as he is now? Well, obviously he's had a long time in the military. He's very used to military discipline. He still thinks and strategizes in terms of the military. Where I would probably he knows how to follow orders while at the same time trying to do his own thing, which I think is kind of a staple of movies and shows like Top Gun and that kind of vein. What I didn't like about him is that his flaws were never so explicitly stated such that we knew what he needed to grow beyond. So one of the things that we know about him from Isom #2 is that he really isn't cool with Ingrid Valdez being on the team, but we are never really told why. And I have a tendency to think it's because that she is not like a superpower badass like himself and Braxwell. he and Braxwell are, tanks slash fighters slash, they are like combat jets. She is not that. And so he is wondering why she's even on the team. What is she good for, in other words? And he may realize that, he and Braxwell, they're just basically point and shoot accepts. They're not the ones who are they're not themselves equipped to do the other kinds of police work that Ingrid Valdez is capable of doing, like doing the investigative portions, like doing the legwork. He could probably take it up to some small extent, like he did with the bank scene, but not anything deeper than that. He's certainly no computer expert. He wouldn't be able to sift through, a company's files to find out who the shell company is actually being held by. And what he would need to learn is that it does not require the kind of power that he has to be a hero. That's something that he had the chance to learn in the bank during Alphacore #1, because his power was obviously not enough to stop Billy Bob Quinn. And yet the bank president who locked Billy Bob Quinn in the vault and used his head to defeat him saved the day and demonstrated heroism without power. I think Bryan Solari's flaw has been equating heroism, or at least heroic ability, with power. He was apparently instrumental in the War of Separation, and probably there was nobody at the time who could have done what he did at the time. And so his being exceptional, his being on a level 9 or 10 on the Schuster scale, probably is what he ties in with heroic ability, and he needs to learn through the example of others who are less powered than he is that heroism is not just a function of personal power, but it's a function of character. And then realize that he has character deficiencies that he needs to work on. He needs to be less impulsive because, his impulsivity caused almost I can't imagine how the city maintains Alphacore after the events of Alphacore #1. And Bryan Solari wants there to be an Alphacore. He needs to have something to do after having gotten out of the military, and Alphacore is it. And at the same time, Ingrid Valdez also needs there to be an Alphacore because she needs to be more than just a superpowered face. She needs to have some outlet for her intellect. And without Alphacore, they really have nothing. And that is the link that could bind them together. If they could just come to the mutual understanding that Alphacore is what the both of them need, and that in order for Alphacore to work, they have to work together. So that is the kind of character focus that I would put on them. You can see it very, very, very subdued, but it really needs to come out more to the surface. Because right now, we're just left with these little tiny Velcro hooks that aren't kind of like latching onto anything. And it makes for a very unemotional reading experience, because you can't without the conflict between the two characters and turning into some sort of grudging cooperation. There's really nothing that binds Alphacore together other than the job, and the job is not enough. And they really need to find a way to bring Braxwell into the whole thing too. I mean, he is kind of, I think he's like the key to doing it, but I mean, just the fact that he doesn't talk is like a huge hindrance. And I wonder why it is he doesn't talk. I mean, does he like sound like Mike Tyson or something? Where he's, I mean, not that Mike Tyson is embarrassed about his voice, but it's incongruous with the hulking guy that he is. That maybe he just feels like I just don't want to be called Mike Tyson. That's one way I'd look at the character. I mean, he's somebody who has to realize that power isn't everything, that heroism is something that can come from people who have practically no power. And in understanding that, he can come to respect Valdez and work with her to maintain Alphacore's existence. Let's see. And Rippaverse Goalpost says flawed characters are a good thing so that improvement can be seen over time. Yeah, it's just that we need to see at least the start of that improvement. We see opportunity for improvement in Alphacore #1, but Solari never takes advantage of any of it. I have not seen one thing from Solari except for, the only time he even shows any grudging admiration for Valdez is when she becomes as immature as he is. And that's exactly the opposite direction that these characters need to go. When she like, flicks her whip and destroys the plane, it's like, oh, maybe this is my kind of person. It's like, oh, great. Now you're both idiots. So yeah, that's pretty much where I would have put that. Okay, that's about enough for tonight. We've got him for about an hour and a half here. So thanks for everyone for joining me. I was actually wondering whether or not people would be filing off to go see Mr. Medicare. And actually, since my count has gone down to about 10, I'm wondering if Ethan Van Sciver went back on his original estimation that he was not going to do a trash cast tonight. In fact, let me go check that. I'm very curious to see whether he has, in fact, started something up. And the verdict is... no, it looks like people just got bored of me. That's fine. It happens. It happens after a while. So, all right. Thanks, everyone. I appreciate your spending time with me tonight. And I will talk to you all later. Have a good one.